the whole notion of logic.
These are the journalisms by way of critical aggregation, eliminated from the analytical research of a historiographer, neither from the Oriental nor the Occidental. Your engagement, through a like, a share, and a subscribe, will accelerate us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before.
Engage impulse engines. Engage.
Engage.
Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage.
Engage.
Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage.
Captain.
Engage emergency override.
Engage. Engage. Engage.
Engage forward shields, 35%.
Engage.
Engage the cloaking device.
Engage.
Of them. Engage them in conversation.
Engage. Engage.
Palestinian forces unite. Watch this space. Palestinian factions in Damascus to coordinate unified stance against Israel. This is from the Cradle. Hamas and the Syrian government recently rekindled their ties following a long period of tension and estrangement. A delegation representing Hamas arrived in the Syrian capital Damascus on 2 March in order to coordinate efforts among the different Palestinian resistance factions with the goal of confronting the extremists of Benjamin Netanyahu's new government, particularly in the wake of the unprecedented escalation of tensions across the occupied territories. The delegation held a series of meetings during which they discussed the current situation in the occupied territories, the implementation of extremist Israel policies, and escalation of violence against the Palestinian people, as well as Israel's rejection of international resolutions, particularly relating to illegal settlement expansion, Palestinian sources told Russian news outlet Sputnik. Another meeting will be held this afternoon with the representatives of the Palestinian factions in Syria, aimed at announcing a unified stance against expansion and other escalatory actions. According to the sources, the Palestinian representatives will also meet with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. On 25 February, Israel approved a plan to support the construction of about 4,000 additional settlement units in the occupied West Bank, despite the fact that it was reported a few days earlier that it would temporarily halt settlement expansion. A day later, on 26 February, Netanyahu confirmed that his government never had any plans to halt the expansion. This coincided with the Palestinian shooting operation that left 2 settlers dead in the West Bank town of Huwara, in the city of Nablus. In response, settlers launched a violent rampage in Huwara, killing 1 Palestinian, injuring hundreds, and destroying dozens of homes and vehicles. The next day, another Palestinian shooting operation that killed a settler prompted Israeli troops to lay siege to the entire West Bank of Jericho. The massive surge in tension is the result of the new Israeli government's excessively extremist nature. Since its inauguration, the Israeli government has issued drastic restrictions against Palestinian prisoners and has proposed annexing large swaths of Palestinian territory. Just yesterday, the Israeli Knesset passed its first reading of a bill to impose the death penalty on Palestinian prisoners convicted of carrying out attacks against Israelis. The meeting of the Palestinian factions in Syria's capital on Thursday came in the aftermath of recent kindling of relations between the Syrian government and the Hamas movement, as the latter took an aggressive stance against Damascus following the start of the war in 2011. And from the Palestine Chronicle, Tulkarm Brigade to join Lion's Den Jenin Brigade in armed resistance. The Tulkarm Brigade announced via a video message on its Telegram channel that rapid response groups have been assembled to respond to Israel's massacre in the occupied West Bank. The New Arab reported this. The phrase rapid response groups is a reference to Raed el-Karmi, the leader of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, during the Second Palestinian Intifada. The Tulkarm Brigade has announced its presence at a sensitive time, after the Lion's Den in Nablus announced that the train of resistance in the West Bank has been launched. After Tulkarm's accession to the armed resistance and the completion of the formation of its cells, the resistance in the West Bank now has a shield and a sword. The armed group said this in a statement after 6 Lion's Den members were killed on February 23rd. A source close to the Tulkarm Brigade spoke on the condition of anonymity to Al Arabi Al Jadid about the emergence of what was formerly known as the Triangle of Fear, which includes Jenin, Nablus, and Tulkarm, active during the Second Intifada. The source said that this had been organized through a high level of coordination on all fronts between the Tulkarm Brigade, the Lion's Den in Nablus, and the Jenin Brigade. The launch of resistance operations by the Tulkarm Brigade coincides with Jordan's hosting of high-level talks at the Aqaba Summit on Sunday, which was attended by Palestinian Authority and Israeli officials. The source said that the Tulkarm Brigade considers any attempt to deter resistance unacceptable. He added that operations against Israel will continue and big surprises are coming. And from the Middle East Monitor, Fatah did not consult regarding Aqaba Summit, insist Palestinian factions. The Palestinian factions denied Fatah's claim on Wednesday that it consulted and coordinated with them regarding the Aqaba Security Summit held in Jordan at the weekend, El Rasalah has reported. The Palestinian Authority and Fatah are spreading lies in order to whitewash the shame of their participation in the Aqaba Summit, said Arkan Bader of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. The senior PFLP official denied the claim by PA official Hussein al-Sheikh and Fatah official Azam al-Ahmad that consultation took place. He reiterated that the PLO's executive committee did not discuss such participation at its meetings. The summit came to impose coexistence with the Israeli occupation at the expense of the core reason for the struggle, which is to end the Israeli occupation, he pointed out. According to Bader, PFLP leader Ramzi Rabbah sent several messages to PA President Mahmoud Abbas asking him not to participate in the summit. However, Abbas ignored these messages as he insisted on the retention of his dictatorship and not sharing the Palestinian decisions on the national issues with any other factions. The Secretary General of the Palestinian Initiative, Mustafa al-Barghouti, said that many PLO factions have stopped attending its meetings because of the domination of a certain body and faction. Other Palestinian factions also denied being consulted or even contacted by the PA or Fatah regarding participation in the security summit held in Jordan, which coincided with an Israeli massacre in the city of Nablus that took the lives of 10 Palestinians. Fatah official. It's the time to escalate resistance. This is also from Memo, that's Middle East Monitor. This is the time to escalate the resistance against the Israeli occupation, member of Fatah Central Committee Abbas Zakai said yesterday. Al-Watan Voice reported that Zakai blamed the settler violence against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank and Jerusalem on the internal Israeli differences and the clashes between the Israeli government and Israeli demonstrators. The senior Fatah leader said Israel's long thought that only it's the right to determine the fate of the Palestinians, and only it has that right, and the fate of their occupied homeland. Regarding the Palestinian Authority participation in the Aqaba Security Summit over the weekend, he said, an invitation by Jordan and Egypt, who have good attitudes towards the Palestinian cause, should not have been ignored. He stressed that Fatah's stance towards the Palestinian issue has not changed and that a decision to stop security coordination with Israel was taken, and the PA is to continue sticking to this decision. And watch this space, and remember that your engagement, by way of a like, share, and or subscribe, will propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. Amir Abdollahian, Foreign Minister of Iran, the EU states influenced by terrorist MKO, he says. Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian voiced regret on Thursday that some European states, under the influence of information provided by terrorist, the Mujahideen-e-Khalq organization, the MKO, which is designated as a terrorist group by the Islamic Republic. In a phone call, the top Iranian diplomat discussed with his Spanish counterpart, Jose Manuel Alvarez Bueno, developing Tehran-Madrid bilateral ties. Amir Abdollahian hailed as good and historic the relations between Tehran and Madrid, expressing Iran's readiness to promote cooperation with Spain in various fields, Iran media reported. Denouncing the terrorist currents for abusing the recent riots in Iran, Amir Abdollahian said, a number of European governments have sadly miscalculated under the influence of false reports from MKO, which was also on the U.S. list of foreign terrorist organizations for years. For his part, Alvarez highlighted the close relations between Spain and Iran, stressing the need to maintain mutual cooperation. The two senior diplomats also talked about the latest developments in Ukraine, the course of cooperation between Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency, the negotiations on the removal of sanctions on Iran, and the issues relating to consular affairs between the two nations. And from Mehr News Agency, Amir Abdollahian calls out CNN's propaganda on Iran. Hossein Amir Abdollahian made the remarks in an interview with CNN's Christian Amirpour, which was aired on Wednesday night. When the anchor referred to CNN's report that claims that some Iranian women were tortured and raped under arrest, the Iranian minister said that there have been so many baseless claims made in social media and the media, he stressed, adding, "We've seen some of CNN's reports that are biased and false." He also noted that no one was arrested in peaceful demonstrations, adding, "However, in those protests that turned violent, some individuals who had come from outside the country and were using firearms and killing the police were arrested." The remarks came as on November 21st, 2022, CNN published a detailed report on Iran's security forces using rape to quell protests. The lead protagonist of the whimsical story was 20-year-old Armida Abbasi. She was arrested in mid-October during the foreign-backed riots in Iran, triggered by the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini for her role in instigating violence against security forces. CNN reported, based on unnamely ghostly sources and social media leaks, took the distasteful propaganda to the next level. Citing unconfirmed leaks from the hospital where Abbasi was treated, the report claimed that her head had been shaved and the medical staff was horrified to see evidence of brutal rape. Many media outlets in the West cited the CNN report to push the narrative that women's rights are not respected in the Islamic Republic and that rape is used as a weapon to oppress women. Despite Iranian media convincingly rejecting the claims in the CNN report and presenting irrefutable facts about the case, the propaganda mills in the West remained ablaze. From Press TV, some EU states miscalculated about recent riots, and that's a quote from the Iran Foreign Minister. Iran Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian says a number of European governments made grave miscalculations about recent violent riots in the Islamic Republic under the influence of erroneous and misleading reports compiled by the anti-Iran terrorist group Mujahideen Khalq organization, the MKO. Amir Abdollahian made the remarks in a telephone conversation with his Spanish counterpart, Jose Manuel Alberes Bueno. The top Iranian diplomat denounced terrorist outfits and groups for exploitation of recent unrest in the country, saying, "Some European governments have sadly miscalculated under the influence of the false reports by the MKO terrorist group, which was for years on the United States list of designated foreign organizations." The Iranian foreign minister also appreciated the congratulatory message from King Felipe VI of Spain to Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi on the occasion of the 44th anniversary of the victory of the Islamic Revolution. He also voiced Iran's readiness to expand relations with Spain, and Alberes, for his part, hailed the close relations between Madrid and Tehran, stressing the need to maintain mutual cooperation. The two senior diplomats also exchanged views on the latest developments in Ukraine, the course of cooperation between Iran and the IAEA, the negotiations on the removal of sanctions on Iran, and issues pertaining to consular affairs between the two nations. Earlier, Amir Abdollahian criticized the unconstructive approach and miscalculations of some European countries in relation to the recent riots in Iran, as he met with his Finnish counterpart Pekka Haavisto on the sidelines of a meeting of the Human Rights Council in Geneva, Switzerland. Foreign-backed riots broke out in Iran in mid-September. Iran's intelligence community has had several countries, including the U.S. and the U.K., using their spy and propaganda apparati to provoke violent riots in the country. Rioters went on a rampage, brutally attacking security officers and causing massive damage to public property. Dozens of people and security personnel were killed in the riots. And also from Mayor News Agency, Iran Foreign Minister expresses regret EU states were influenced by MKO. Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian and his Spanish counterpart Jose Manuel Alvarez Bueno had a phone conversation on Thursday discussing developing Tehran-Madrid bilateral ties. He assessed the relations between the two countries as good and expressed Tehran's readiness to further expand those relations. He also thanked the King of Spain for sending a congratulatory message to Raisi on the 44th. Referring to the recent foreign-provoked riots in Iran and the abuse of anti-Iran terrorist groups such as the MKO, the Iran foreign minister criticized the approach that some countries adopted against Iran under the false and misleading information that MKO terrorists gave them, most of those countries European. Jose Manuel Alvarez, for his part, referred to the good relations between Iran and Spain and stressed developing bilateral relations between the two countries. Consular issues, Iran-IAEA cooperation, the latest developments regarding the Ukraine war, and lifting anti-Iran illegal sanctions were all also topics discussed between the Iranian and Spanish foreign ministers, and they conveyed warm greetings as well. And remember to watch this space. Your engagement by way of a like, share, and or subscribe will propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. G20 foreign ministers failed to find a joint resolution. And this from IOLCO.za. China and Russia refused to support G20 joint declaration. Both countries were the only G20 members not to agree to the statement demanding Russia's complete and unconditional withdrawal from the territory of Ukraine. And this is in New Delhi that China joined Russia on Thursday in refusing to support a demand for Moscow to cease hostilities in Ukraine. A statement from the group of 20 foreign ministers meeting in Delhi, New Delhi, showed. Lavrov told the assembled foreign ministers that Western representatives had derailed the meeting in an effort to scapegoat Russia for their own failings, disrespecting efforts by the Indian hosts to reach agreement on other issues. I want to apologize to the Indian presidency and to our colleagues from countries of the Global South for the obscene behavior of some Western delegations, which have turned the G20's agenda into a farce, Lavrov said, according to Russian news agency TASS. Russia and China criticized the West for employing blackmail and threats against other countries. Moscow said following a meeting of the two countries' foreign ministers. And from Mina FN, Blinken says that Russia and China blocked the G20 summit, or statement, the G20 statement. China sided with Russia in the G20 format, blocking the adoption of a joint statement condemning Russia's war on Ukraine and calling to respect the UN Charter and international norms. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said this on Thursday during a press conference in New Delhi, following the meeting of G20 foreign ministers. Own correspondence reports. The chair statement by India today reaffirmed the declaration issued by the G20 leaders last year in Bali, which, and I quote, strongly condemned the war in Ukraine and stress it's causing immense human suffering and exacerbating existing facilities in the global economy, noted the head of the U.S. Department of State. He emphasized that Russia and China were the only two countries that made clear that they would not sign on to that text. According to the top diplomat, the 18 other members of the G20 confirmed that it's essential to uphold international law in the multilateral system. This includes defending all the purposes and principles enshrined in the Charter of the UN and adhering to international humanitarian law. In this regard, the U.S. Secretary of State emphasized that every member of the G20 and practically every country continues to suffer from Russia's war of aggression, a war that President Putin could end tomorrow if he chose to do so, Blinken emphasized. He said that the United States didn't want this war and worked hard to prevent it. Like most countries, we want to focus on the fundamental challenges affecting the daily lives of our people. So even as we stand with Ukraine, while it defends itself as any nation would in that position, we're also determined to keep working with other countries to deliver solutions to the shared challenges, said the head of American diplomacy. In this context, he drew attention to the need to respond to the unprecedented food security crisis around the world. Today, Russia is again slow-walking the export of food from Ukraine, and the Black Sea Initiative is set to expire on March 18th. Russia has refused to commit to renewing it. The message that countries set at today's meeting is clear. Extend the Black Sea Grant Initiative and strengthen it, and do that without delay. The U.S. Secretary of State emphasized this. As Ukrinform reported earlier, India's top diplomat said the G20 foreign ministers failed to agree on the final communique regarding the points concerning Ukraine. He also announced that the ministers would instead publish a final document rather than an official joint statement. And from theprint.in, no joint communique by G20 foreign ministers. Russia and China opposed two paras in chair summary. Russia and China opposed two paragraphs in the chair summary which referenced the Ukraine war. The same occurred in the document issued last week after the G20 finance ministers meet. As predicted by experts, no joint communique was issued following the G20 foreign ministers meet in Delhi Thursday, and instead, India, as G20 president, issued a chair summary. Two paragraphs of the chair's summary, which referenced the Ukraine conflict and had been lifted from last year's G20 Bali declaration, were opposed by Russia and China. The two countries had opposed the same paragraphs that had appeared in the chair's summary following the meeting of G20 finance ministers and central bank governors in Bengaluru last week. Therefore, in two consecutive tracks, no joint communique was reached. Both documents included a footnote that read, paragraphs 3 and 4 of this document is taken from the G20 Bali Leaders Declaration, were agreed to by all members countries except Russia and China, while paragraph 3 saw condemnations of the war in Ukraine and its impact on the global economy. Paragraph 4 urged countries to uphold the UN Charter on International Law. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar had in a press briefing Thursday said it was significant that there was a consensus among member states on the bulk of issues that concern the global south and developing countries. There was a considerable meeting of minds, he told reporters, adding that when it came to discussions on how to tackle issues like counterterrorism, there was unanimous agreement from all member states. Foreign ministers from across the globe have flown into the Indian capital to discuss multilateralism reforms, food and energy security, counterterrorism, and other critical issues as part of the G20 meeting held on 1 and 2 March. And here's a take on this issue from Press TV.
Says the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says the group of 20 has not issued a joint declaration at the end of its meeting due to differences between Moscow and Western countries. Lavrov said discussions over the joint statement faltered on several issues, including Russia's assistance on an investigation into the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline last year. Lavrov repeated Russia's call for an international investigation into the explosions involving Moscow. Western media reports said the meeting was dominated by the Ukraine war, with Western countries proposing a declaration that called for the withdrawal of Russian forces from Ukraine. China has also joined Russia in rejecting the Western proposal.
And here is what is called by the G20 a quad on Middle Eastern issues. We'll take a few minutes from this.
The Foreign Minister of Oman, Her Excellency Reem Ibrahim Al-Hashmi, Minister of State for International Cooperation, UAE, His Excellency Asif Said, Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs, and our moderator this morning is the lady in red, Mina Al-Oraibi, the editor-in-chief of The National in Abu Dhabi. Welcome to the stage.
For hosting us here. Delighted to be with you at the Ricina Dialogue. And as a couple of more people come in, I'll just introduce the session, though we've had a great introduction from our dear friend, Ambassador Smotrich. So, a region of opportunities from the Mediterranean to the Arabian Sea. 20 years ago, if we were meeting here, we'd be talking about war. This was the eve of the Iraq War 20 years ago, and the blowback from terrible September 11 attacks. 10 years ago, if we met, we would be talking about Arab uprisings, political transitions, lack of certainty. Today, the region is in a different place. Not everything has been sorted out, not everything is rosy, but we can genuinely talk about opportunities that can be fulfilled. The potential of the region has always been there, and yet much of it was lost. At this moment, we see the United States is a little less engaged, even if they profess otherwise. A real energy transition is underway, and what it will look like for the region and the world. Regional leadership and alliances formulating and emerging, but also a region that continues to have a war in Yemen, difficulties in Iran, Horn of Africa instability, and key issues related to climate, water, lack of education in too many countries. So it's a mixed picture, but we see the opportunities. And so that's what we're talking about today, in the midst of course, the Ukraine war and the fallout from that war and the global polarization that we see. So I would like to start with Your Excellency, Minister Sameh Shoukry. When we look at this region, of course, the Suez Canal is integral when we talk about the region, Arabian Sea to the Mediterranean Sea, but also Egypt's role as a connector for Africa, Asia, the Arab world. And currently, of course, you are president of COP27. So when you look at this region at a time of opportunity, in this moment of multilateral confusion, let's say, how do you see it, and what can Egypt do to try to simulate and stimulate some of these opportunities at this time?
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be participating, and we are happy that the Middle East takes a prominent role in terms of this dialogue. I think the main issues revolving are the challenges, but again, the potential. And I think the greatest potential of this region is its population. It is a young population. It is one that is striving to integrate into the global structures, whether economic or political, and it continues to show its resilience and its ability to undertake new technologies and to promote its own well-being. Egypt plays a fundamental role because of its strategic position, because of the Suez Canal, which connects the East and the West, and because of its diverse relationships. Egypt is an African country, it's an Arab country, it's a Mediterranean country, it's part of the non-aligned, it's part of the global South, and it does, being the most populous in the region, have the ability to continue to cooperate on this traditional role as a connector between societies and between peoples, and to take full advantage. Over the last 7 years, Egypt has been on a road of development. It has invested heavily in elevating people out of poverty and creating job opportunities, and depending on infrastructure, the dual carriageway of the Suez Canal, I think, is a remarkable achievement in 1 year that has opened the greater doors of connectivity and the ability to impact some of the supply chain difficulties that were associated with the COVID and subsequently. But again, in the realm of renewable energy, our ambitions are unlimited. I think renewable energy has proven its economic viability and its ability to generate greater wealth, and prices have come down as innovation has taken hold, and we are now on the road to having a 42 mix in renewable energies, whether solar or wind, by 2035. So for all these reasons, we believe we can continue to play a very important and positive role in regional integration and regional cooperation in finding new areas of economic prosperity, despite the pressures associated with COVID, with the crisis in Ukraine, and the need to direct resources to the achievements that have already been demonstrated and the opportunities that are available.
Now, if we just stop for a moment on the climate issue, because as you said, there's opportunity there, but there's also major challenges, especially for our parts of the world, as temperatures continue to rise. When you think about the COP27 moment and trying to calibrate all the momentum that was built around COP, what do you think this region can come out with that can really lead to climate action?
I think COP27 was in itself a defining moment where we were able to maintain the momentum after Glasgow. Mental and competitive
region position itself in this energy transition as a way of opportunity.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the Ricina Dialogue's focus on the Middle East and allowing us the opportunity to discuss matters relevant to our nations and our regions, and certainly a larger collaboration with countries around the world. We're working pretty closely with the Egyptian team, and as my colleague Samah mentioned, the 4 tracks of any COP have to cover climate finance, mitigation, adaptation, as well as loss and damage, which Egypt managed to pull through in a pretty remarkable way. We've heard in past discussions here at Ricina that the international/multilateral system as a byproduct of the Second World War has been what has kept us as an international community relatively safe. And whereas that may be true, and frankly is true to a large degree, that doesn't mean that we can't improve on existing systems. And here walks in climate finance, but in particular multi-development banks. You're right to note that there is no shortage of liquidity, but the way in which funds are being allocated to countries that are transitioning or that are in need of capital for development growth hasn't really reformed, if that's the right term to use, over the last few decades. And as challenges percolate and new and emerging threats grow, we need to find a better way to be better. And we need to be more ambitious, because when we really want it, we can do it. Samah mentioned COVID, COVAX, vaccine development. In less than a year, we had an RNA vaccine. If that says anything, it says if we get our mind around something, we're actually able to deliver on it. That same fervor, ambition needs to find its way in some of the other challenges that we deal with. And if we look at climate,
and that's a good transition point for our next story. So watch this space. More world news coming up. Okay, China warns Elon Musk over Wuhan lab leak tweet. Chinese Communist Party issues blunt warning via state media to Tesla's Elon Musk over pushing Wuhan lab leak COVID theory online. Wuhan lab COVID leak theory online. The Chinese state-run media outline has rounded on the Tesla CEO Elon Musk after sharing a post about the lab leak theory for the source of COVID-19. According to CNBC, a state-run newspaper issued a warning to Elon Musk after he shared a report on the U.S. Department of Energy's low-confidence assessment that the global COVID pandemic originated in Wuhan laboratory. The origins of the coronavirus is a hugely sensitive subject in China after the virus that was first detected in Wuhan turned into a full-blown global pandemic that killed 6.87 million people and caused huge amounts of economic turmoil and population lockdowns. According to CNBC, the social media pages of the Global Times, the English language subsidiary of the government-controlled People's Daily, warned Musk that he could be breaking the pot of China, aka biting the hand that feeds him. After Musk responded to tweets that asserted that COVID pandemic originated in Wuhan research laboratory, Predictably, Musk was responding to ongoing allegations by the far right in the U.S. that Dr. Anthony Fauci funded gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab. The tweet cited news of a classified U.S. Energy Department report concluding with low confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the source of the virus. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman reportedly called for the U.S. government to stop defaming China and politicizing the process of tracing the origins of the virus. The Global Times Post said Musk's tweet and retweets are being used to frame China. Musk has to tread carefully, as China is Tesla's second largest market and is home to one of the most important gigafactories. China scoffs at FBI claim that Wuhan lab leak likely caused COVID-19 pandemic. This is from Asia One. The FBI has assessed that a leak from a laboratory in the central Chinese city of Wuhan likely caused the COVID-19 pandemic, Director Christopher Wray said on Tuesday, a claim China has said has no credibility whatsoever. The FBI has for quite some time now assessed that the origins of the pandemic are most likely a potential lab incident in Wuhan, Wray told Fox. His comments follow a Wall Street Journal report on Sunday that the U.S. Energy Department has assessed with low confidence that pandemic results from an intended lab leak in China. Four other agencies, along with the National Intelligence Panel, still judge that the pandemic was likely the result of a natural transmission, and two are undecided, the journal reported. White House National Security spokesman John Kirby said Monday the U.S. government had not reached a definitive conclusion and consensus on the pandemic's origins. China denounced Wray's comments on Wednesday, saying it was firmly opposed to any form of political manipulation of the facts. Based on the poor track record of fraud and deception of the U.S. intelligence community, the conclusions they draw have no credibility whatsoever, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning told reporters in Beijing. We urge the U.S. side to respect science and facts, Wray said. He couldn't share many details of the agency's assessment because they were classified. He accused Chinese government of doing its best to try to thwart and obfuscate efforts by the U.S. and others to learn more about the pandemic's origin. The virus was first identified in December 2019 before spreading around the world and killing nearly 7 million people. And from rnz.co.nz, COVID-19, why the Wuhan lab leak theory is back, despite no new evidence. More than 3 years after COVID-19 was detected in the Chinese city of Wuhan, the question of how the virus emerged remains a mystery. But on 28 February 2023, the controversial claim that the pandemic might have leaked from a Chinese laboratory, once dismissed by many as a fringe conspiracy theory, resurfaced with FBI Director Christopher Wray's comments that the Bureau believes COVID-19 most likely originated in a Chinese government-controlled lab. It's the first public confirmation of the FBI's classified judgment of how the pandemic virus emerged. In response, Beijing accused Washington of political manipulation. So, what do we know about the competing theories, and why does the debate matter? What is the lab leak theory? It's a suspicion that the coronavirus may have escaped accidentally or otherwise from a laboratory in the central Chinese city of Wuhan, where the virus was first recorded. Its supporters point to the presence of a major biological research facility in the city. The Wuhan Institute of Virology has been studying coronaviruses in bats for over a decade. The institute is a 40-minute drive from the Hunan wet market, where the first cluster of infections emerged. Those who entertained the theory said it could have leaked from WIV lab and spread to the wet market. Most argue it would have been an unaltered virus collected from the wild rather than engineered. The controversial theory first emerged earlier on in the pandemic and was promoted by then U.S. President Donald Trump. Some even suggested it could have been engineered as a possible biological weapon. While many in the media and politics dismissed these as conspiracy theories at the time, others called for more consideration of the possibility that the ideas persisted, despite many scientists pointing out there's no evidence to back it up. Classified U.S. intelligence reports saying 3 researchers at the Wuhan lab were treated in hospital in November of 2019, just before the virus began infecting humans in the city, began circulating in the U.S. media in 2021. The issue is still hotly contested. A World Health Organization investigation was supposed to get to the bottom of it, but many experts believed it produced more questions than answers. A team of WHO-appointed scientists flew to Wuhan in early 2021 on a mission to investigate the source of the pandemic after spreading 12 days there, which included a visit to the laboratory. The team concluded the lab leak theory was extremely unlikely, but many have since questioned their findings. A prominent group of scientists criticized the the WHO report for not taking the lab leak theory seriously enough, and that's World Health Organization. It was dismissed in a few pages of several hundred-page report. We must take a hypothesis about both natural and laboratory spillover seriously until we have sufficient evidence and data, the scientists wrote in Science magazine. They're not the only experts who called for the laboratory leak to be looked at more closely. Even the World Health Organization's own Director General, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, called for a new investigation, saying all hypotheses remain open and require further study. And Dr. Anthony Fauci said in 2021 he was not convinced the virus originated naturally. This was a shift from a year earlier when he thought it most likely COVID had spread from animals to humans. And what does China say? China's hit back at suggestions that the virus may have escaped from a laboratory by calling it a smear. State media have consistently accused the U.S. government and Western media of spreading rumors about the source of the pandemic. Responding to Ray's remarks, China's foreign ministry spokesperson accused U.S. intelligence agencies of politicizing the investigation into the origins of the virus. The U.S. intelligence community had a history of misdeeds involving fraud and deception. Mao Ning told the press briefing as such. She said their conclusions regarding the origins of COVID-19 had no credibility. China has pushed another theory suggesting the coronavirus may have entered Wuhan in food shipments of frozen meat from elsewhere in China or Southeast Asia. The Chinese government has also pointed to research published by one of its leading virologists into samples collected from bats in a remote, abandoned mine. Professor Shi Zhengli, often referred to as China's Batwoman, a researcher at the Wuhan Institute, published a report in 2021 revealing that her team had identified 8 coronavirus strains found on bats in the mine in China in 2015. The paper says that coronaviruses from pangolins. Let me see just a second. Pangolins are scaly anteaters. Wow. From pangolins pose more of an immediate threat to human health than the ones her team found in the mine. Added to this is an unsubstantiated conspiracy theory long pushed by Chinese propagandists and repeated by Mao Ning at the Foreign Ministry briefing on 1 March 2023, suggesting that the coronavirus was made and leaked from Fort Detrick in Frederick, Maryland, about 80 kilometers north of Washington, D.C. Once the center of the U.S. biological weapons program, Fort Detrick now houses biomedical labs researching viruses including Ebola and smallpox. Is there another theory? Yes, and it's called the natural origin theory. And this argues the virus spread naturally from animals without the involvement of any scientists or laboratories. Supporters of the natural origin hypothesis say COVID-19 emerged in bats and then jumped to humans, most likely through another animal or intermediary host. The idea was backed by the the World Health Organization report, which said it was likely to vary that COVID-19 had made it to humans through an intermediate host. This hypothesis was widely accepted at the start of the pandemic, but as time has worn on, scientists have not found a virus in either bats or another animal that matches the genetic makeup of COVID-19, leading some to doubt the theory. Nevertheless, following FBI Director Ray's remarks, many scientists who have studied the virus have stressed there's no new scientific evidence pointing to a lab leak. A natural origin is still the more likely theory, said Professor David Robertson, head of viral genomics and bioinformatics at the University of Glasgow. There's been an accumulation of evidence, what we know about the virus biology, the close variants circulating in bats and locations of early human cases, that firmly points to a natural origin centered on the Hunan market in Wuhan City. Professor Alice Hughes from the University of Hong Kong agreed. She said the U.S. Department of Energy's conclusion that the virus was most likely the result of a lab leak in Wuhan appears not to be based on new evidence and remains the weaker of the two main hypotheses of the origin of the virus. And why does this matter? Given the massive human toll of the pandemic with the recorded deaths of about 6.9 million people worldwide, most scientists think understanding how and where the virus originated is crucial to preventing it from happening again. If the zootonic theory is proved correct, it could affect activities such as farming and wildlife exploitation. In Denmark, fears about the spread of the virus through mink farming led to millions of mink being culled. But there would also be big implications for scientific research and international trade if theories related to a laboratory leak or frozen food chains were confirmed. Any confirmation of a leak may also affect how the world views China, which has already been accused of hiding crucial early information about the pandemic, and it could place further strain on U.S.-China relations. From day one, China's been engaged in a massive cover-up. Jamie Metzel, a fellow at the Washington-based Atlantic Council who's been pushing for the lab leak theory to be looked into, told the BBC in 2021, "We should be demanding the full investigation of all origin hypotheses that's required, but others have cautioned against pointing the finger at China too quickly. We do need to be a bit patient, but we also need to be diplomatic. We can't do this without support from China. It needs to be a no-blame environment," Professor Dale Fisher of Singapore's National University Hospital told the BBC. And from irshadgul.com, IG News, China's called the U.S. claim of COVID spread from the Wuhan lab as absurd. China's dismissed as absurd the claims of the U.S. Federal Investigation Agency that corona epidemic spread from the laboratory in the Chinese city of Wuhan. In a recent interview, FBI Director Christopher Wray said that the FBI's assessments showed that the coronavirus originated from a lab in Wuhan, China, and became a global pandemic. Speaking to the ABC Corporation, or the American Broadcasting Corporation, Christopher Wray said that recent FBI assessments show that the global pandemic was the result of a lab accident in China. The FBI director's statement came after the publication of a review in the U.S. Journal of Nuclear Energy, which said that the corona epidemic was the result of an accidental lab incident in China. According to the report published in the American Journal, the research results of 4 institutions, including the National Intelligence Panel, are different. They believe that the epidemic was spread naturally, and there may be 2 other motives behind it that are not yet clear. White House spokesman John Kirby also said while talking to the media on Monday that the U.S. government has not reached a final conclusion regarding the spread of the epidemic. FBI Director Christopher Wray, during his interview, refused to give more details, citing the justification of secret information, and accused the Chinese government of trying to find out the causes of the epidemic from the United States and other countries, and about the epidemic. More information has been put in the way of gathering obstacles. On the other hand, China described the statement of FBI Director Christopher Wray as absurd, and made it clear that any attempt by China to distort the facts for political purposes will not be tolerated. Speaking to the media in Beijing, Chinese Foreign Minister spokesman Mao Ning said that given the U.S. intelligence's past track record of fraud and deception, the claims made by them have no credibility. He said that we expect America to respect science and facts. It should be remembered that the initial cases of the coronavirus were reported from the Chinese city of Wuhan in December 2019, after which the epidemic spread globally and more than 7 million people died due to the epidemic worldwide. And remember, your engagement by way of a like, share, and or subscribe will propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. And we'll be back with more world news. And from breakingnews.ie, Boris Johnson criticizes new Brexit deal for Northern Ireland. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has criticized the new Brexit deal for Northern Ireland, arguing it's not about the UK taking back control and suggesting he'll not vote for the plan. Mr. Johnson said he'd find it very difficult to support the Windsor Agreement and vote in the UK's House of Commons, despite claiming some credit for the new pact. In a combative speech in Westminster, Mr. Johnson said he hopes the DUP leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, restores power sharing to Northern Ireland, but he raised numerous concerns about the new deal with the European Union, saying, "I'm conscious I'm not going to be thanked for saying this, but I think it's my job to do so. We must be clear about what's really going on here. I'm going to find it very difficult to vote for something like this myself," he said. This is not about the UK taking back control, and although there are easements, this is really a version of the solution that was being offered last year to Liz Truss when she was Foreign Secretary. This is the EU graciously unbending to allow us to do what we want to do in our own country, not by our laws, but by theirs. Mr. Johnson called for his controversial Northern Ireland Protocol bill, which the EU argued would breach international law, to be restored if the new deal does not work out. I'm going to find it very difficult to vote for something like this myself. I hope that it will work, and I also hope that it doesn't work. We'll have the guts to employ that bill again, because I've no doubt at all that it's what brought the EU to negotiate seriously, he says. And from politics.co.uk, splitting and under siege, the DUP faces a Brexit showdown like no other. The discussion on Northern Ireland Protocol has changed subtly in recent days, and just because Brexiteers have new lingo by way of the Windsor Agreement to brandish, rather both the substance and terror of the debate, or the tenor of the debate, have shifted dramatically because the Prime Minister appears to have negotiated a better deal with the EU than many were expecting. In response to the new red lane, green lane trading regime sweetened by a Stormont break, there have been no resignations, no stinging intervention from Boris Johnson, barely a whisper from the European Research Group of Eurosceptic conservatives. That former Brexit negotiator, Lord David Frost, has emerged as a cautious supporter of the framework, a serious coup for the PM, and a microcosmic signal of the improved mood music. But the terms of the protocol's resolution success were always more multifaceted than bettered relations within the Conservative Party. A rather more important yardstick is what extent the deal contributes to the resumption of power sharing in Northern Ireland, shunting the Democratic Unionist Party back to Stormont in time for the 25th Good Friday Agreement's anniversary on 10 April. In May 2022, the DUP withdrew from Stormont, citing their fervent opposition to the Northern Ireland Protocol as negotiated by Boris Johnson. The unblinking standoff has incapacitated politics in the 6 counties, and to a lesser extent the UK as a whole ever since. And from newsletter.co.uk, Jamie Bryson, Windsor deals must be rejected, but its core parts could be restructured within a constitutionally acceptable framework. On Monday, the Windsor framework was published. Since then, I personally, alongside colleagues from the Center for the Union and others, studied the relevant materials, the most crucial of which is the legal text contained within the draft decision of the EU-UK Joint Committee. The first thing to say, and this again is from Jamie Bryson, the first thing to say is that I'm not sure whether the Joint Committee is even empowered to make such far-reaching amendments to the withdrawal agreement of which the protocol is part. That, however, is besides the point for present purposes. It was obvious to me relatively quick that the right answer was as to whether unionism should endorse the deal. However, such a detailed and complex series of interlocking texts warranted rigorous examination, and as such I reserved judgment until today when I've written this article for the newsletter and published a more extensive 1,600-word piece on the Unionist Voice website. In common with the protocol itself, the government and the Prime Minister himself says they're doing one thing, but the legal text does another. It was claimed, for example, that the customs border in the Irish Sea had been removed. It did not. Indeed, Article 9.2 of the draft decision of the Joint Committee makes clear that even for the Green Lane, information is required to be provided for customs purposes. That confounds the pronouncements of the Prime Minister and the government's own command paper. Moreover, whilst the command paper and the Prime Minister, both in Parliament and writing in the newspaper, proclaim their commitment to the Acts of Union, there is absolutely no legal text which in fact frees the Acts of Union from the present subjugation. That's unsurprising because the Windsor framework is incompatible with the Acts of Union. There's not even a credible argument that it is not. That answer is simple. EU law continues to apply in trade. GB&I is on different footing that, for example, trade from England to Scotland. That is, EU law continues to apply in trade. Great Britain to Northern Ireland is on a different footing than, for example, trade from England to Scotland. It follows that sacred principle which bound together the anti-protocol campaign and to which every unionist party has expressly committed is the Acts of Union. It's the first of the DUP's 7 key tests. Those tests don't belong to DUP politicians but to the electorate who provided a mandate based upon them. Sir Geoffrey Donaldson has united unionism alongside Jim Allister. They both remain faithful to their commitments and have been unwavering in their position. The Acts of Union must be restored. It follows, therefore, that in truth the answer to the Windsor framework is not in fact at all a difficult one for any self-respecting unionist. It does not restore the Acts of Union. Rather, it entrenches the subjugation. Therefore, anyone who endorses the deal is complicit in the subjugation of that which, in a legal sense, is the Union. There is the potential that the Windsor framework's component parts could be restructured in order to fit them within a constitutionally appropriate framework. That's a small but yet fundamental step. A step, however, which offers the Prime Minister the prize of being able to arrive at a position whereby he has a deal which can truly command majority support in unionism as well as nationalism. The Windsor framework must be rejected, however, if the game's still on, and I believe it is. The component parts need not all be dispensed with. They can be restructured and placed within a constitutionally acceptable framework. And from Roderick Murray, also from Newsletter, Windsor framework absolutely not a split in DUP, insists Sir Geoffrey Donaldson. Sir Geoffrey Donaldson has said there is absolutely not a split in his party over the Windsor framework. Speaking on BBC Radio Ulster, the DUP leader said the party would assess the legal text before coming to a collective conclusion. Let me be clear. Our party officers, our assembly members, our members of parliament, and ultimately our party executive will determine the party's approach on this issue, he said. We'll consult and we'll take our time. We'll talk to the people. We'll listen to what people are saying. They'll articulate their views. Of course, there will be diversity and a range of views. People will react in different ways, but the DUP will come to a collective decision on the agreement. When asked how long it would take for the party to reach a conclusion on what had been agreed, he said it will take as long as it takes. We want to get this right. That's the important thing. Rishi Sunak sidestepped questions about how much time he will give the DUP to consider the Windsor framework and what would happen if they reject it, saying he's confident all parties will recognize it gets the balance right for Northern Ireland. People need the time to engage with it, understand it, ask questions, the Prime Minister told reporters during a visit to Coca-Cola plant in Country Antrim. We're going to give them that and answer the questions in the meantime, but I'm confident they'll come to see this for what it is, which is, I think, a historic achievement that gets the balance right for Northern Ireland. He added that time was needed for all parties to understand the Stormont break and that the government wants to work with the team to codify how that's going to work. But he added, we've not been shy about saying, I think the people of Northern Ireland need and deserve their government. They need it to be up and running and delivering for them, whether it's in public services or whether it's in taking advantage of the incredible opportunities in the Windsor framework. Prime Minister UUP, or he meets UUP leader Doug Beattie. Ulster Unionist leader Doug Beattie said it was disingenuous for any political party to suggest it would take weeks or months to formulate a response to the Windsor framework. Speaking following a meeting with the Prime Minister in Coantrim, Mr. Beattie said Mr. Sunak had been buoyant. He said, I think the Stormont break is one of those things which sounds good when you talk about it, but as soon as you start delving into it and understanding how it actually works, it throws up more questions than it does answers. But I can see the Prime Minister is working hard to sell this deal, and we still will work hard to scrutinize it. Anyone who's saying this should take weeks and months, I think, is being disingenuous. Any political party should be able to look at this and engage with their party at every level and come up with what they believe to be the outcome, certainly within a week or so. Mr. Beattie said there is no reason why the Stormont power-sharing institutions could not be operating while parties study the detail of the Windsor framework. He said Stormont could be up and running now. You could have an executive now, and at the same time, we could be looking at this framework. You can do that at the same time, but if we drag this out for months, then businesses will be sitting there, not knowing whether they're coming or going. We need to hear from businesses. We need to know if it works for them, but there's no point dragging it out. People need to show the courage of their convictions. Look at the deal coming up with your analysis and making your pitch. From BBC News, Northern Ireland Brexit deal number 10 says misunderstandings will be clarified. The Prime Minister is willing to clarify any misunderstandings about how the new Brexit deal for Northern Ireland will work. The Windsor framework was announced on Monday following months of talks. Rishi Sunak's official spokesman said there were misunderstandings about it but didn't clarify what they were. He said the government respected the need to give the Democratic Unionist Party time to look at it. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Boris Johnson criticized the deal. Mr. Johnson agreed the original post-Brexit arrangements for Northern Ireland back in 2019, known as the Northern Ireland Protocol, which created a trade border in the Irish Sea. In a speech in London, he said the new framework was not about taking back control. He said he'd find it very difficult to vote for Mr. Sunak's deal. The new Windsor framework was signed to alter the protocol. It'll mean goods moving from Great Britain, which are staying in Northern Ireland, would use a green lane at Northern Ireland ports, meaning they would face minimal paperwork and no routine physical checks. Goods which are due to travel into the Republic of Ireland would use a red lane, meaning they face custom processes and other checks. Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton Harris, is to talk to Northern Ireland's main political parties in the days ahead to assess their reaction to the framework. The DUP is boycotting Northern Ireland's devolved government at Stormont until it concerns about post-Brexit training agreements or arrangements are addressed. So, for the party, they've not said it'll support the framework and that it'll assess, or that it will assess it against its 7 tests before deciding what to do. But on Wednesday night, one of its MPs, Ian Paisley, said he didn't believe it met those tests. Mr. Paisley was speaking in his role as parliamentary chair of the think tank Centre for the Union. It's a think tank which aims to promote the union of the UK through what it describes as working across the political divide and putting forward coherent and convincing arguments. Mr. Johnson directed some of his comments at the DUP leader during his speech. It's not for me to advise Sir Geoffrey. I hope he can find a way of reconciling himself and his party to this outcome and getting back into Stormont, he said. But I'm conscious, and I won't be thanked for saying this, we must be clear about what's really going on. This is not about taking back control. This is the EU graciously unbending to allow us to do what we want in our own country, not by our laws, but by theirs. On Thursday, David Campbell, chairman of the Lawyers Communities Council, said the Prime Minister had mistakenly oversold the deal. He told BBC Northern Ireland's The View he believed there had been some progress on trade issues within the UK, but in terms of the attempt by the Prime Minister to sell the ending of the Irish Sea border and the ending of essentially the sharing of European sovereignty in Northern Ireland, those simply have not been dealt with, he continued. I don't view the negotiations as over by any means. Treasury Ministry Andrew Griffith told a financial service conference in Germany that the Windsor framework was something many said couldn't be done and shows what we can achieve when we put our minds together. He said that as supporting trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland offered sustainable solutions that will be in the UK's economic interest. In financial services, the Treasury stands ready to continue conversations with our European partners on enhancing regulatory cooperation, Mr. Griffith added. What does the New Deal change in practice? Under the Brexit deal, certain goods have to be checked when they enter Northern Ireland from Great Britain. That's the current process. The goods are checked at ports in Northern Ireland on arrival, and they can be moved into the Republic of Ireland once checked. The new plan, the goods are split into two different lanes. Goods destined for Northern Ireland go into the green lane, meaning they wouldn't have to be checked and would require minimal paperwork, and goods destined for Ireland and the EU go into the red lane, and checks are carried out. All right, watch this space. We'll be back with more news after this. Remember, your engagement by way of a like, share, and or subscribe will propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before.
is obvious to the most simple-minded that Loci is of an inferior breed.
The obvious visual evidence, Commissioner, is that he is of the same breed as yourself.
Are you blind, Commander Spock? Oh, look at me.
I thought you scientists were supposed to keep an open mind.
There's a difference between keeping an open mind and believing something because you want it to be true.
Your friend Spock is a logical man.
I find your arguments strewn with gaping defects in logic.
Most illogical reaction. We demonstrated our superior weapons. They should have fled.
The whole notion of
Should have
logic.
respected us. Of course. Mr. Spock, respect is a rational process. Did it ever occur to you they might react emotionally? With anger?
Doctor, I'm not responsible for their unpredictability.
You do not think like the others. There are no colors to your patterns of logic. There's only black and white.
Logical, unemotional, completely pragmatic. And we poor, irrational humans whip them in a fair fight. Now you'll find yourself back among us illogical humans again.
Which I find eminently satisfactory, Doctor. For nowhere am I so desperately needed.
Because she feels. I don't. All I know is logic.
The whole
We have
notion
tried
of
to understand
logic.
how we feel about our life here, about each other.
Emotions are alien to me. I'm a scientist.
You're gonna leave here without them? Run off on some wild goose chase halfway across the galaxy just because you found a discrepancy in a hydrogen cloud?
Doctor, I'm chasing the captain, Lieutenant Uhura, and Ensign Chekhov, not some wild aquatic fowl.
Mr. Spock, you have a remarkably logical and analytical mind.
Thank you. I prefer the concrete, the graspable, the provable.
You'd make a splendid
U.S. officials not planning to meet Smotrich on visit amid uproar. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich's visit to Washington next week to speak at an Israel Bonds conference was still scheduled to take place amidst outcry over his call to wipe out the Palestinian town of Huwara. But the White House said Thursday that government officials would not be meeting with him. From Al Jazeera, U.S. faces growing calls to deny entry to Israel's Bezalel Smotrich. The United States government is facing growing calls from advocacy groups, including Jewish American organizations, to impose a visa ban on a far-right Israeli minister who called for wiping out a Palestinian village. The U.S. Department of State had denounced Israeli Minister of Finance Bezalel Smotrich's comments on Wednesday, calling them repugnant and disgusting, but advocates have said verbal condemnation is not enough. Smotrich, an ultranationalist who also oversees civilian administration in the occupied West Bank, is set to speak at a conference in Washington, D.C. later in March, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency reported on Wednesday. I think the village of Huwara needs to be wiped out. I think the state of Israel should do it, Smotrich was quoted saying by Israeli media outlets after Israeli settlers ransacked the Palestinian town and burned down dozens of homes and cars. From here on, I'm probably going to substitute the term Israeli settlers with I'll substitute Zionist occupiers for Israeli settlers. Americans for Peace Now, a U.S. Jewish group that opposes the occupation, said Smotrich's comments were a call for a war crime and urged President Joe Biden to deny him entry into the U.S. The United States must be clear. The only thing that should be wiped out is his violent and hateful ideology. It's unacceptable abroad and it's unacceptable here, APN said in a letter to Biden that urged supporters to sign. Now Smotrich wants to bring his hatred to U.S. soil. He plans to travel to the United States later this month. We're here to say that he's not welcome. For its part, J Street, a Jewish American group that describes itself as pro-Israel and pro-peace, called on U.S. officials to shun Smotrich. Yes, but shunning Smotrich is not barring him from being in office or even condemning him. And shunning him is totally different. They should make clear that Smotrich's comments and actions are immensely damaging to the U.S.-Israel relationship, J Street said in the statement. It's an empty statement. Additionally, the administration should make clear that comments promoting grave violations of human rights, such as those made by Smotrich, are grounds for reexamining or reexamination of a visa for entry to the United States. It's just grounds for reexamining it. We don't necessarily want to say that he's not allowed, but let's just re-examine it.
What is this nothing you talk about?
Asked about the calls to deny entry to Smotrich, Department of State spokesperson Ned Price told reporters on Thursday, "We don't speak to individual visa records nor as a general matter to a particular individual's eligibility for U.S. visa. Nevertheless, we'll continue to make clear that we reject the comments from the minister, just as we did yesterday." The occupiers' attack on Huera had sparked international outrage against the government of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, with many Palestinians saying that Israeli forces watched on and did not try to stop the rampage. Israel, accused of imposing a system of apartheid by leading human rights organizations like Amnesty International, receives at least $3.8 billion of U.S. aid annually. Washington has been increasingly critical of the policies of Netanyahu's far-right government, including the expansion of Israeli settlements on occupied Palestinian land. However, the Biden administration regularly reasserts its ironclad commitment for Israel, ruling out practical measures to counter Israeli government policies. Progressive advocates and lawmakers have said Washington should impose conditions on its aid to Israel, but Biden has repeatedly dismissed the idea. Teruah, a rights group that represents hundreds of rabbis across the U.S., called on the Biden administration this week to revoke Smotrich's visa and urged American Jewish organizations to refuse to engage with him. Not only does his comment add to the pain of families and community members harmed by the violence in Huara, it also adds to the increasing incitement from members of Netanyahu's new far-right extremist government. Teruah CEO Rabbi Jill Jacobs said in a statement. Adala Justice Project, a Palestinian-led U.S. advocacy group, encouraged supporters to sign on to a letter to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, urging him to ban Smotrich from entering the country. The United States must ban the travel of Israel's Bezalel Smotrich to the United States in March 2023 because of his statements that call for violence and atrocities against the Palestinian people. The letter reads describing the Israeli minister's comments against Huara as a call for genocide. Democratic Senator Peter Welch said he shared a letter with Biden on Thursday urging the U.S. president to take a more active approach to push towards a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We have a choice. Stand by passively as a withered two-state approach recedes into oblivion, or do our best to re-energize it with more assertive efforts to persuade the Netanyahu government to stop further expansion of settlements in the West Bank, to halt all de facto annexations, and to reaffirm Israel's commitment to a viable two-state solution, the senator wrote. Any hope for peace and prosperity in the region depends on the United States making the choice right now. And one of the narratives that I never hear is Israel could lose their state. It's possible that they could violate so many just like human standards that the international community would actively disallow them to have their state. This could happen. I mean, because majority of the right-wing people in Israel who consider themselves Israelis and consider themselves pro-Israel do not support a two-state solution. So the two-state solution is for people who are moderate in the United States and people who are pro-Israel that are in Palestine, that are Palestinians. That's what the two-state solution is used for. And from the MiddleEastEye.net, right groups urge U.S. to ban Israel's Smotrich over call to wipe out Huwara.
Let's try and unpack that for a second. Let's try and de-emotionalize this for a second. Let's try and intellectualize this for a second. Let's try and rationalize this for a second.
Growing number of groups demand Israeli minister be sanctioned and barred from coming to the U.S. for incitement of genocide. A growing number of rights and advocacy groups are calling for the United States to issue an entry ban on Israel's finance minister Bezalel Smotrich after he called for a Palestinian village to be wiped out earlier this week. In separate statements, a number of groups ranging from organizations focused on human rights in the Middle East to rabbinical groups in the U.S. have called for Washington to deny Smotrich a visa over his comments. Democracy for the Arab World Now, Dawn, on Wednesday called for both Smotrich's visa to be revoked and for him to face sanctions. The rights group stated that his comments could amount to incitement of genocide. The U.S. should immediately sanction Bezalel Smotrich for directly and brazenly encouraging mass violence against civilians, Adam Shapiro, advocacy director for Israel-Palestine at Dawn, said in a statement. The United States must not give the impression that it condones his hateful and violent ideology and policies, and anything less would make the Biden administration culpable in whatever violence comes next. The Abdallah Justice Project has started an online petition demanding Smotrich be banned from the U.S., and so far has received more than 3,000 signatures. A state representative calling for the burning of homes and killing of people should not have been given a platform to spread his racism, or should not be given a platform to spread his racism and incite more violence against Palestinians, Samaya Awad, communications director at the Abdallah Justice Project, told Middle East Eye. Awad added that the U.S. should also be pressured to ban groups from raising money for illegal settlements built on Palestinian land and whose occupants most recently set ablaze the Palestinian village of Huwara. When asked during a press briefing on Thursday whether the U.S. would issue such a ban, State Department spokesperson Ned Price said, "We don't speak to individual visa records, not as a general matter to particular individuals' eligibility for a U.S. visa." Price on Wednesday called Smotrich's remarks repugnant and disgusting and called for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to disavow the comments. It's time for Biden to end U.S. complicity in Israel's violent apartheid. Under no circumstances should Bezalel Smotrich be permitted to visit the U.S., Beth Miller, political director of Jewish Voice for Peace Action, told MEE. Rift between Israel and Jewish Americans. On Sunday, hundreds of Israeli settlers attacked Palestinian towns and villages near Nablus, following a shooting that killed 2 Israelis in the town of Huwara earlier that day. In the rampage on Huwara and other Palestinian villages, at least 1 Palestinian was killed and nearly 400 were wounded. Israel's police have arrested 10 people for suspected involvement in the attack, and we should call them Zionist occupying forces. They have arrested 10 people for suspected involvement. Before and after the mob violence took place, several Zionist politicians, including Smotrich, appeared to encourage or support the settlers' actions. Smotrich is expected to visit the U.S. later this month and will meet with the New York Zionist Bonds Organization. He does not have any meetings scheduled with the Biden administration, and 2 U.S. officials told Axios that even if he asked for meetings with Biden officials, he would not get them. In addition to rights groups and progressive Jewish organizations, some liberal Zionist groups, interesting, also condemned Smotrich's remarks and called for him to be denied entry. The pro-Israel group Americans for Peace Now is circulating its own petition urging Biden to deny Smotrich entry. Smotrich's comments are even more dangerous now that Israel's de jure annexation of the West Bank has made him effectively the governor of the territory with broad oversight over most of civil administration, said Rabbi Jill Jacobs, CEO of Teruah, a Jewish human rights group representing more than 2,300 rabbis and cantors in North America. And you see there, the CEO of Teruah itself does not represent Israel, does not represent Zionism. They make the choice not to. The CEO of Teruah is a Jewish human rights group, not an Israeli human rights group or a Zionist human rights group. Jacobs called on the Biden administration to decline any meetings with Smotrich if he's allowed into the country, and also urged U.S. Jewish groups to refuse to engage with him. The calls add to a growing rift between the broader Jewish American community and the Israeli government, headed by Netanyahu and a far-right coalition. Okay, we're going to open a channel here. And remember, your engagement by way of a like, share, and or subscribe will propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. Beam me up.
Beam me up, Mr. Spock. Beam me up. Lock on transporters. Beam us up. Beam us up. Quickly. Beam us up home. Beam us up.
Prepare to beam us up, Mr. Scott. Beam us up, Mr. Scott.
Prepare to beam us up. Mr. Scott, prepare to beam us up. Have Scotty beam us up. Beam us up. Beam us up. Scotty, beam us up fast. Stand by to beam us up. Scotty, beam me up.
Beam me up.
Beam us up now!
Stand by to beam us up.
No need to beam me up, sir. The situation is under control.